So what does homelessness look like in the state of Georgia? Well, if you look at the point in time count, it says that we have about 3,500 people who are homeless on any given night during the year. If you look at the McKinney-Vento numbers, which are the numbers that the school system is required under the McKinney-Vento Act to keep and then report, and then if they do not report them accurately, they can be subject to enforcement by the Department of Justice. They say that we have 35,000 children who are homeless or at risk of homelessness in the balance of state in Georgia. And so you're talking about 10 times as many, and one is a point in time count that includes adults, and the other one is just children, and it's still 10 times more. Why is that? The McKinney-Vento definition of homeless includes people who are couch surfing, who are living in hotel motels, who are living in shelters, who do not know where their housing is going to be tomorrow or the next night. And they are required to know these things under McKinney-Vento in the school system. Because the school system is also required to know where every child gets on the bus and the proximity of the bus stop to sex offenders in the state, they know exactly where they are picking these kids up from and dropping them off. And it is the single best indicator of what's going on in your community. So what does this map represent? This map is the number of children who are on the McKinney-Vento list for 2020 and as a percentage of the population of the county. The low end is close to 0 as you can get. The high end is about 3%. And so when you look at this map and you pick out your county on this map, if it has the bright red dot, it means that your community is approaching the 3% mark on the percentage of children in your school system that are considered homeless under McKinney-Vento. So that means that you are talking about 30 children for every 1,000 kids you have in your school system. Okay, so that becomes the single best way to target homelessness in your communities, especially in rural Georgia. Because if we look at the point in time count for rural Georgia, that counts street homelessness, chronic persistent homelessness. Those numbers are 0 in many of our counties. If you see a county on this map that's 0, it's because they did not report. It is not because there are no homeless children in that county. Every county in the state has children who qualify under McKinney-Vento to be counted as homeless or at risk of homelessness. And you can think about it like this. How many children do you have that are living with their grandparents or their great-grandparents and they don't have custody of those kids? Those kids would be considered homeless under McKinney-Vento. What does that mean for a community?
Okay.
Well, if you feel like your calls for service are going up, if you feel like your school system can't keep up with the needs of the children, either behaviorally or you're seeing that your free and reduced lunch rates are higher. If you have a pervasive feeling that something's going on, this is the number that you want to look at, because this will help you identify where that's coming from and what the need is. And the results are children who don't know where they're going to sleep, typically also don't know how they're going to eat, and those children cannot perform at school. They're going to come to school tired, they're going to come to school cranky, they're going to come to school in chaos. And so as a community, this is where you can start.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Before you go off of this map, could you briefly talk about the balance of state versus the other PJs in the state?
Absolutely.
And because I think there may be some people on the call who may not understand the difference between the numbers.
Yeah, of course. So for the state of Georgia, the largest communities with the largest population qualify to get direct funding from the federal government. And those communities are called participating jurisdictions. And they receive their own allocation separate from the state of Georgia's allocation. And they make the determination on how that money is spent. So if you think about it in terms of where the largest communities, you're talking about City of Atlanta, Fulton County, Gwinnett, DeKalb, Cobb, Richmond, Muskogee, Bibb, Chatham, and I'm missing somebody. But they are the ones that are going to have their own pots of money. Everybody else falls under the balance of state, and that money is then allocated to DCA, and DCA awards those balance of state funds for the home program through a competitive round process. So if you are not in one of the participating jurisdiction counties, then you are in the balance of state. So what are some of our key suggestions? Like I said, if you're not currently having a monthly collaborative meeting, either through Family Connection, Department of Family and Children's Services, it doesn't matter who's calling the meeting. But if you're not having a collaborative meeting that brings partners to the table, you should start having one once a month. And within that meeting, you need to include on the agenda a discussion about housing to be competitive. But there may be other things and other grants that you can also add to that agenda that you then can apply for as well. So what does that meeting look like? Well, first of all, it has to be diverse. You need to make sure that you are well representing all of the diverse measurements within your community: race, culture, faith, income. But you also need to make sure that you have at the table a diversity of thought, community knowledge, experience, especially lived experience with the conversation that you are having. In the state of Georgia, the Community Housing Development Organization model is that meetings are made up of 1/3 public representatives, so from your local government, your school system, state partners, 1/3 private, so it could be industry, it could be civic organizations, foundations, and then 1/3 from the public are the people who are being served. And so you want to make sure that that is broken down into people who have lived experience.
And Kelly, could you also talk about engaging community leaders to make sure that they're a part of this? Because this is a really important piece when looking at diversity at the table and making sure that that education piece is a part of, because this is, so could you talk a little bit about that and maybe how to invite different community leaders, how to help them engage, things like that?
Absolutely. So one of the issues that we run into, we live in a partisan society where we have a very, very diverse division of thought, okay? And so what you're trying to get to is you're trying to get to common ground. The McKinney-Vento numbers are really a great place to get to common ground, because people who have a true passion for your community can come to some agreement that we need to take care of children in our community and make sure those children have a roof over their head. So if you can't agree on anything else, if you have a 30-year history of not being able to agree on anything, you need to make sure that you are bringing people to the table to try to find that common ground so that you can then start to build from that and build goals that can move you forward in the areas that you can agree on. And it may just be the one, and you may not necessarily agree on how to go about doing it, but you agree that you need to do something. If you need to bring in people who can help facilitate and mediate that, there are organizations throughout the state that can provide that for you, both through the University of Georgia with Carl Vinson, as well as through the state and state organizations. But the most important thing is that you get everybody to the table and you start to have the conversations about what you can agree on so that we can get to yes, and we can figure out how to take care of these children and people with disabilities and seniors and veterans and youth aging out of foster care and all of these subpopulations that right now we're not doing the job we need to be doing across the state.
And so maybe,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so maybe in those circumstances, especially for a lot of people who have a grassroots organization, and really bringing people in, inviting your local city council person inviting a county commissioner to a meeting, making sure that you have maybe 2 or 3 of the top pastors or other leaders of faith communities, come to the table to really discuss what the issues are, especially if you're proposing to do an application for a non-congregate shelter for additional, affordable housing, because their support is really important in order to educate the community, in order to make sure everyone's on the same page. And when you rally a whole community around building these particular buildings that HOMEARP wants to do to help make your community safer, to make them, be able to have the housing that is needed. We keep hearing that we need affordable housing to, allow the kids to have homes to come home to. Having everyone rally around that one goal is really important. And so, so community leaders mean a lot of different things. And so just make sure that you really look at all the options that you have available to you. So sorry, I just I hopped on my little box there for a second.
No, I'm right there with you. So how do you do that? Well, part of what we have to do is we have to get to a place where we're talking about things with a common language. And data-informed design does that. You start from what is concrete. What are the numbers that are universally accepted? American Community Survey and the census, despite whatever issues we have in the way things are counted, that is a commonly accepted starting point for demographics. You start there and you start building a database, a list of what you know. You know how many kids you have in the school system. You know what your free and reduced lunch rate is. You know what your graduation rate is. You know what the numbers going in and out of your local jail look like. You know what your calls for service look like. You know how many parcels you have. You know what their cost or what their valuation was 10 years ago versus what it is now. Is it dropping? These are all data points that you can start to collect to look at the numbers that you agree upon to start building consensus on where we go from here. The next thing you do is you bring in people who have lived experience in whatever area it is. A great example of that is would you go and decide that you were going to have an Alzheimer's initiative and not talk to anybody that is a family member of an Alzheimer's patient? That makes no sense. So for the community that you want to serve, bring those caregivers, those advocates, and those participants to the conversation and make sure that they are informing the decision making from the ground up. The other thing is that you have to build a collaborative to be able to make sure that you have skin in the game and a layered funding. No one has enough money to do this all by themselves. It doesn't exist anymore. And so bringing people together from different areas to labor, to build a labor pool and a time pool and a funding pool to grow these programs is absolutely imperative if you want to compete for grant money, because that is what federal and state funding is all about. That is the buzzword. You have to leverage other funds against the commitment that you are asking for from the state or the federal pot of money that you're going for.